Hey, good morning, Ethos Church. My name's Aaron Etheridge. I'm one of the pastors here at Ethos, and I'm so excited to begin this 7-day period of prayer and fasting with all of you. You know, at the tail end of our last season of prayer and fasting, our city experienced a few crazy things, devastating tornadoes, a global pandemic, our city being shut down for several months, and our nation began to experience natural disasters from coast to coast, and then we are walking in the middle of an unprecedentedly divisive presidential election. So why in the world would we jump back into prayer and fasting? All the things that have come at us this year are things that we never could have predicted. It has felt like we have gone from one storm to a next, some literal, some metaphorical, right? The event of this year has had me and the rest of the Ethos leadership really just seeking God diligently on our knees and asking Him for clarity. Lord, how are you leading us as a church in the midst of all these storms? And in August and September, I felt like the Lord He spoke to me and began to give me some clarity about what He was doing in really kind of an unexpected way. This clarity came in the form of two phrases that honestly I would never use in everyday normal language. These two phrases were this. One was batten down the hatches, and the other phrase was gird up your loins. Now, it's okay if you don't know what these phrases mean. We're going to spend some time this week looking at them and unpacking what we think God might have for us in these phrases. And I had to do a lot of homework myself to go and figure out what they meant. And on day 4, we'll come back to this phrase of gird up your loins. But today I want to look at this phrase of batten down the hatches. What does this phrase actually mean? You may have heard this before. It's an idiom that we often use when we talk about preparing for a storm that's coming. But where does this phrase come from, and why do we say it? What does it mean? The phrase batten down the hatches actually started in the 19th century among sailors, and it was a phrase that they would use to prepare a ship for a coming storm. And all it means is a batten is a plank of wood, and a hatch is an opening in the deck of the ship. And so when a storm was coming, they would say, batten down the hatches, and that meant they would get these battens, these pieces of wood, and they would literally nail them over the openings in the deck. What they were doing was trying to secure the ship from any points of vulnerability where water could get in through the deck. So it became this phrase of preparation. What was crazy is the day after I did some reading on that to figure out what the phrase meant, another friend of mine who had no idea I'd been kicking that phrase around in my heart and in my head, he came to me and he started telling me about his thoughts on a story, an often overlooked story in Acts chapter 27. And you'll never believe what happened in this story. He says, I was reading this story about the Apostle Paul stuck on a ship in the middle of a storm. And immediately my antenna went up and I went to Acts 27 and I started reading. And what we find there is that the Apostle Paul is on this ship that is bound for Rome that gets caught up in an unbelievable storm. And Paul is just a prisoner on this ship. He's not a leader. He's not the captain. He's not even a sailor. Paul is just a prisoner, but we find him on this ship. And over the course of this week, we'll come back to this story every now and then, just touching back in with it and see how it parallels the journeys that we've been on this year and what God might be saying to us about what is yet to come. But there's just one thing I kind of want to pause today on the first day of our fast to notice about this story. In verse 15 of Acts 27, the author of Acts, Luke, says, "The ship was caught by the storm, and they could not head into the wind, so they gave way to it and were driven along." The picture we get here from Luke is this ship that seems mercilessly caught in a storm being driven along against its wishes. And that just captured for me what this year has felt like in so many ways. And what we can imagine is happening on that ship is that they are battening down the hatches. In fact, it says they run ropes under the ship to try to hold it together. Days 2 and 3 of this fast are going to focus on how do we identify the vulnerable places in our lives where we are spiritually susceptible to taking on water. But today, I want to start by just taking an honest inventory of what's been happening this year. How bad is this storm that we are in? Will this storm pass? When it does pass, should we expect other storms? And how are we faring in the middle of it? And how are those around us faring? So I want to encourage you right now, get your prayer guide that you should have. You can read over it, and it will guide you in asking some questions to help you do some assessment about what's been going on in this year in your heart and the hearts of those around you as we've been at sea on the storm that's tossing us about. I love you all so much, Ethos. So excited for this journey together.